it may not be a plague of biblical proportions, but the locust invasion of countries like Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia and Kenya in East Africa are experiencing is the largest in a quarter of a century. The government in Mogadishu and others in the Horn of Africa, as well as the United Nations, have called it a national emergency, saying the huge swarms of insects pose a major threat to food security in a region that's already endured decades of famine, war and poverty. The current upsurge has reached enough numbers for it to be declared a plague covering 5 countries, with the ravenous insects now said to be threatening both Uganda and South Sudan. We'll try to understand how it has come to this in a moment. But first, here's some assessment of the locust crisis from the East African region.
Authorities are responding with...
Well, the predictions from the Desert Locust Information Services in Rome, which is part of FAO, is that if the weather conditions prevail and this breeding you're seeing here continues all along northern Somalia, northern Ethiopia, then you'll end up having nearly 500 times the populations that we've already witnessed invading Kenya and parts of southern Ethiopia. Now, the desert locust consumes a lot of food, and the critical thing with this particular population we're seeing now, it'll be mature and it'll be migrating just in time when you have crops germinating in southern Somalia and in parts of Kenya, parts of Ethiopia. And this can actually lead to a severe food crisis if the locust is not controlled at this early stage and it manages to survive up to that point where it can actually affect crops in the next coming rainy season, which we expect to start anytime from April this year.
This region is already facing relatively high level of acute food insecurity. So this is the type of food insecurity that requires humanitarian assistance. If we are looking only at the 3 countries of Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia, we have about 12 million people who are already in need of humanitarian assistance in terms of food security. So it means what we are afraid is that with the invasion of desert locust that is really in huge numbers and the quantity of food that these locusts are eating, we think that it will create a further deterioration of the food security situation.
Well, for more on the locust plague in East Africa, I'm joined now from our London studios by the Kenyan broadcaster and editor of Informer East Africa, Julius Mbaluto, and here in Abuja by the Ugandan writer and African affairs analyst, Okuli Okello. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. I'll go to you, Julius, first. Just give us a sense of the scale of the problem in East Africa. I mean, you publish the newspaper, the East African Informer. I understand the swarms are much larger than normal. Apparently one swarm that moved from Somalia into Kenya is about 40 kilometers long, and this is just a single mass of insects.
Charles, locust plague in East Africa is pretty much scary. The thing is, it's traced back to Yemen and came across South Somalia and found its way in northern part of Kenya. But also the heavily affected countries as we speak is Ethiopia, Kenya and Somalia. Uganda is not that safe, and also neighboring South Sudan may find its way, they may find their way to South Sudan as well and Uganda as well. But the heavily affected places are those 3 countries, Ethiopia, Kenya and Somalia. In terms of the enormity of the problem, you find a situation whereby the locust is just coming at a time where people had done their farming and they were just about expecting their harvest. Now, when that is the case, it just totally coming at the wrong time, because the food that is clearing off is just the only hope to so many people. Remember that every country in Africa has those who are rich and those who are very poor. So when you talk about a garden, one farm. They're just like small farms. Individual poor farmers may own just about an acre of a farm, or even a quarter of an acre, which is very small. And that just means, to that farmer, it means their livelihood. It just means everything. When we talk about the pastoralist communities, where actually it's very heavily affected in Kenya, in all the counties within the northeastern part of Kenya, these pastoralists also were happy that it rained quite a lot and there was at least a lot of food for their animals. But now these locusts have come, they're just clearing the food for the animals. At the same time, they are clearing food for the farmers. So it is really serious, because if farmers are not going to harvest well because of the locust, that means immediately there will be a problem of food. There will be food shortage. But what worries a lot of farmers and Kenyans is the fact that the climate, which is conducive for favoring the breeding of the locust, is still going on, and there are fears that they might be multiplying. And if they multiply, the other fear is that come April, which is the next season in Kenya, when farmers plant and hope to get harvest, then it means also that will be affected as well. So it's pretty scary stuff.
Well, thank you very much for laying it out. Now we're all terrified, and I understand that there's also a warning that it may well stretch beyond East Africa if this current infestation continues, because apart from being very large, they're also very numerous. A single swarm, I understand, can range in number from 200 million to 10 billion insects. And of course, the writer and African Affairs analyst Okuli Okello is with me in the studio. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Okuli, because I know we have to take a break in a hot second, and I don't want you to talk for 5 seconds and I'll have to interrupt you. But I want to understand what the cause of this phenomenon is, and we'll talk about that when we come back. You're watching The Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the swarms of desert locusts that are tearing through the Horn of Africa. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyigolu. Now, every now and then, desert locusts undergo an extraordinary transformation. When they get crowded together, they stop being solitary creatures and become scary beasts. They change color and form groups that can develop into huge flying swarms of ravenous, marauding pests. Such swarms of locusts have invaded large parts of East Africa, and they are absolutely huge, containing up to 10 billion insects and stretching over hundreds of kilometers. In terms of travel, they're able to cover up to 200 kilometers a day, devastating livelihoods in their relentless drive to eat and reproduce. According to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, an average swarm of locusts can destroy enough crops in a day to feed 2,500 people for a year. The last major infestation in Africa occurred in West Africa between 2003 and 2005 and cost some $2.5 billion in agricultural losses, according to the United Nations.
Reviewing the situation when it comes to the desert locust upsurge that is currently occurring not only in Kenya but also affecting Somalia and Ethiopia. What is absolutely critical for us is that we anticipate a potential deterioration of the food security situation. We are in a region where over 11 million people in the 3 countries are already in acute food insecurity. Therefore, we need to make all possible effort to avoid such a deterioration.
The first swarm crossed the border into Kenya from Somalia on 28 December 2019. Other swarms continued coming in from Ethiopia. We recognize that the pest invasion and potential to spread rapidly to other counties pose unprecedented threat to food security and livelihoods in the country. Fighting this invasion is not without challenges. First, there are transboundary pests that must be fought through a regional strategy. Unfortunately, because of insecurity in some of our neighboring countries, it has been difficult to fight and prevent their migration.
Well, with me from our London studios, the Kenyan broadcaster and editor of Informer East Africa, Julius Mbaluta, and here in Abuja, the Ugandan writer and African affairs analyst, Okuli Okello. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for staying with us. And I'll come to you, Mr. Okello. I think the key question here is, what is the cause of this phenomenon? Because the size and scale of this current plague, if I might call it that, is absolutely enormous and unprecedented, and some have attributed it to climate change, others that it is a biblical plague. What's the rational scientific explanation?
I think it's better to hang on to the biblical explanation.
Well, I don't know.
If only because the particular biblical quote that I like to quote is one that says, "Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country."
So who's not
now,
letting
if you take that, the countries involved, from Egypt to Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, Kenya, all of them, it is the eastern side of those countries that are facing Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the Indian Ocean, and of course the Red Sea. It is also those countries that have welcomed a lot of massive arrival of China. China is building, there's a massive military base in Djibouti. It's got a massive presence in Ethiopia, whether it is in building railways or building shoe factories and other factories, and probably they've just opened a dam that the Chinese built, apart from the one that they are quarreling over with Egypt and Sudan. Kenya has a massive presence of China, building this railway line from Mombasa to Nairobi, and various other investments. And so I would think that if I was a biological warfare expert, I might just think of combining two things: that geographical location and also the fact that most of these countries, most of their population is actually on the land, agricultural. As the Kenyan commentator was saying, the amount of land they tend to cultivate is small, because they have little energy to use beyond their muscles. So if you attack those people on the basis of undermining the food security of their rural populations, you weaken those countries enormously.
Right.
Now, it is interesting that the commentator of the Food and Agriculture Organization, his analysis shows that they were very well aware that locusts were breeding in the desert, breeding on, at least one of them says, on the Indian Ocean itself.
Right. Well, but that's because of climatic conditions.
Yes, the point is that you can say it is climatic conditions. You can say somebody is aware that factor is going on, and instead of, as they says, instead of stopping it and getting those governments to intervene to block this massive birth and breeding of these creatures, they wait till they are ready to.
Right. Okay. Well, let me bring Julius Mbaluta in, because to be fair, in contravention of what you're saying, the FAO actually was informing Kenya about this, saying, look, this is going to head towards your territory, and trying to get them to take preventative measures.
It had bred after
well,
they have bred.
Well, I mean, it's not really so much it's also the responsibility of the countries concerned to look after themselves. But let me bring Julius Mbaluta in, because Julius, apparently the rational scientific explanation for this is climate change. They're suggesting that it's fueling an increase in cyclones in the Indian Ocean, and scientists are predicting that as a result, there'll be an increase of locust outbreaks in the Horn of Africa in the future. What is your take on that?
I do think the scientific explanation of the presence of locusts is a climate change. And climate change is because most of the time, like late last year, that was 2019, rains almost stop around mid-January or somewhere there. But rains have continued to carry on, which was not the case in years before. Talk about Kenya. The last time, experts are saying the last time Kenya experienced this amount of locusts was some 70 years ago. Ethiopia, Somalia, 25 years ago. So it tells you it's been away. Locusts have been away from the Kenyan landscape for a long time. But climate change, which is the explanation, Kenya's witnessed a lot of rainfall late last year, which is gone on and is still going on. Now, when you look at the position of Kenya, where locust is heavy there, it's northern part of Kenya. Traditionally, that area is normally the hottest and the warmest and the driest. Now, scientifically, they are saying that locust requires a warm, moist climate for their eggs to hatch. Otherwise, if it was totally dry, they wouldn't make it. So therefore, the idea that northern part of Kenya is fairly warm, and also because of the rain it's been moist, it means that that climate, it just meant the climate to be favorable for the breeding of locust. And of course, when you look at the countries they are emanating from, like Yemen is pretty well dry. So,
okay, I'm just going to come in there because we're almost out of time, Julius. I want to get a word in from Okuli Okello there, because, I mean, when you look at a country like Somalia, for example, you know, it's a country that has so many other problems. I mean, it's been in a state of conflict for over 30 years. It's also suffered successive droughts. And then late last year, it also suffered from tremendous flooding, which I understand is what is also contributing to the presence of the locusts. So one imagines that a country that's already on its knees now being threatened by this problem of locusts is having serious problems. And we've got very little time left.
But it is also a country in which a lot of people are interested in its geographical location. The Turks are very interested in it. The Persian Gulf people are very interested in it. Iran is very interested in it. The United States is very interested in it.
Yeah, what's that got to do with locusts?
It has got to do, I'm saying we should seriously take biological and whatever weapon you want to talk about with regards to agricultural attack of a country. We should take it seriously instead of saying we should just leave it to the area of speculation.
I understand what you mean. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and it sounds like a fascinating chat, but I'm afraid I've got to go. Julius Mbaluto in London and Okuli Okello in Abuja, thank you very much indeed. That's it for this edition of The Arise Interview. Join us again tomorrow for another edition from me and the entire team here in Abuja and London. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.